Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Aaliyah Pavla with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. We will also have a series of audience polling questions during today's webinar. When we reach each poll slide, the poll question will pop up automatically on your screen. Our presenter will give a few seconds for you to select an answer from the options on your screen and click Submit. Thank you in advance for your participation. This session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Andrew Graf is the Chief Product Strategist for Team Dynamics. His passion lies in helping organizations thrive in an ever-changing environment. Andrew is well-versed in the common issues facing IT leaders in healthcare and helps these leaders map out a way forward. Andrew believes that success comes when customers, team members, and the company are all aligned. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Andrew to begin today's presentation.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we'll get right into it. So if we look at the title slide, obviously we don't need any introduction to me, and thank you for that. So what we're seeing in the healthcare space is just this onslaught of technology that has entered the ecosystem. And we've seen some significant impacts to the IT organization's ability to execute a lot of strain on resources, where resources may not be sufficient to deliver on what's expected by the hospital administration. So we're going to walk through a couple of observations, some results from some studies we've done. We'll also be polling the audience along the way, and we'll talk about some of the ways we see CIOs adjusting how they manage and think about managing their resources to address these challenges. And a little bit about us. So Team Dynamics is a work management platform, so think service management, work order management, project portfolio management, and that resource capacity management software platform. And we focus largely on public sector, so healthcare, education, and government. All these organizations have similar cultural threads, right, and similar structural threads. And so as we go out into the market, these industries are the ones driving our product roadmap. And I think that's a fairly big differentiator for us, because you really get a seat at the table when it comes to product governance. So as we think about this, the question we're asking is, what can IT leaders do to reduce resource strain on the IT team while offering high levels of service? So we're seeing the need in the industry to be that we need to continue providing high levels of service, but we can't do that and execute on digital transformation with the kind of strain we have on our existing resources. So we'll walk through some concepts that we have seen to be effective. The first is that you think about the ecosystem of work within your organization. And typically there are people who have roles and responsibilities for service management. Some people are dedicated to it, right? You have service desk technicians who are dedicated to providing service, but a lot of people also have other types of work. So if I'm a DBA or a developer, I may provide some level of service, right? But I'm also doing project work and I'm doing operations work as well. So when you think about it, we have all of these types of work that we're managing. And that's a challenge. So typically what we find is these different types of work get managed in different platforms, which really spreads our resources thin, and it's really difficult for leadership to make confident decisions and truly understand what's going on in the organization, where our constraints are, to justify additional budget, to justify restructuring the organization, et cetera, which now those types of decisions and being confident in them is a premium. So we're going to get to our first poll question. So the first poll question is, can you view resource allocations across both tickets, work orders, and projects in one view? Okay, so go ahead and answer, and we're going to give it about 30 seconds to collect the answers from the group. And I would say it's not uncommon if the answer is no. It's not uncommon if getting the answer to this question requires some analysis and combining data from multiple systems. We find that really, really frequently. But we also find that the CIOs who do have a clear picture of their resource allocation and where people are allocated and are able to adjust as new requests come in for technology, or I'm sure that all of you have been disrupted over the last 8 weeks. How do you adjust effectively moving your people when you don't have a great view into what they're doing? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and look at the results here. So this is not surprising. So 83.5% of you said no, we do not. So as we think about this, I think that the most important thought is, well, how can I understand what my resources are doing, how they're allocated? And there's a lot of ways to get to that. A lot of organizations sit there and will become a little stifled, say, oh my gosh, this seems like it's incredibly complicated to do. What we recommend, based upon what we've seen great higher ed, great healthcare CIOs do, is they start simple. So sitting there saying, okay, let's go to each manager and say, let's say I work for you. You're going to look at my day and say, what percentage of Andrew's time is spent on service? What percentage of time is Andrew's efforts spent on operations, on project work? Just as percentages. And that's a good place to start to get this holistic picture and allow managers to work on it. They can validate it with their team members. It's not rocket science at that point. Now you can go to the other end of the spectrum where you're tracking actuals against those estimates too, but baby steps are often very helpful, at least to paint a picture to your administration when they say, hey, this is something we need to do, or you have something imperative that you need to do. You can articulate how you're going to need to change allocations. What does that mean? Well, that means justifying the delay of projects that were in flight to fit in something new that needs to be transformational now. You know, telemedicine is one of the big things we've seen impact, a huge push to get that up and running and scaled, right? That diverts resources. Well, how can you articulate what those impacts are going to be to administration so their expectations are set? These are the sort of foundational building blocks. And again, I'm not at all surprised to see this type of number. Okay, we have our second polling question. Can your end users see all of their work on one desktop? So if I'm a DBA, can I look at a single pane of glass and see everything that I need to be working on and be able to update those things from one place? So my time is focused and I understand what's on my plate, right? Reduces miscommunication, reduces administrative efforts. We'll give that about 30 seconds too. And once again, you know, the best CIOs that we work with in healthcare find a way to pull all this data into one platform. That's one thing our software does, but not in all cases do these organizations use every piece of our software. So there are other ways to do that, but it does make it easy if you have a single platform. So we'll give it a couple more seconds here and then move on to the results. Okay. Once again, a majority say no. So as you're thinking about that, obviously, you know, having a commercial platform like Team Dynamics is helpful in this case, but this can be a tool agnostic conversation as well. If you're managing with a certain set of tools, is there a way you can extract that data into a single place and then push back updates to those other systems? That typically requires integration work, maybe some custom development, but it's possible. So, you know, as you're thinking about that, maybe there's a way to do it with the tools that you currently have. Or obviously you have the option to look at a commercial platform like ours. But again, this is not all that surprising, but we're seeing this trend start to shift, especially as CIOs look and say, okay, we are managing at times what feels like chaos. How can I get this all straight and make sure that individual team members stay on track to get the stuff done that we need to get done? Something to think about, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a little bit of a video that talks about Covenant Health in Saginaw, Michigan, and how they've approached some of these particular challenges. So let's go ahead and have a listen.
I believe the IT department has done a successful job implementing a project when we can improve the efficiencies for our end users. And any time that we can save them clicks, save them time, give them more time with their patients at the bedside, I think is a big win for us.
Our patients expect technology. It's not considered kind of a wow anymore. We expect certain things like virtual visits. I expect to be able to message my providers. I expect to be able to schedule an appointment online and not have to call a provider to make that appointment.
IT's kind of moved from being something that helped the back office employees to now it's involved in everyone's job all the time. In healthcare, they need quick, fast access, like they're running a kiosk or at a checkout line. But the amount of data that they need, the sophistication of the data that they need, is the equivalent of someone sitting down to do a research paper. They're asking to see a patient's chart and an x-ray and all of this information, and they want to be able to get to that workstation, see it like that.
I have my own CIO dashboard, and in one look, I can see any negative survey that's come in the last 24 hours. Then pivot over and look at any project that has a status of red that needs my attention. Then pivot over and look, and this is me glancing, what's going live in the next 30 days. Then pivot over and see what critical tickets have come in from the help desk that may be affecting our entire organization. That's the wow. I think it's the pieces coming together in a single pane for me as a leader to be able to manage and support our organization. Every Monday we have a daily huddle. We get our entire department, 100+ employees, on the phone through Skype. I pull up our Team Dynamics dashboard, go through an announcement section, what's going on in the organization, and then quickly pivot to, here are our key strategic projects, which project requests are coming in. Be able to report status on those very cleanly and clearly through dashboards. Be able to communicate to the organization the value that all these IT dollars are delivering. Some of their products required you had a dedicated FTE to manage and maintain the product. And what we found is Team Dynamics, we felt, had all of the advanced functionality the other products had, but didn't require the need for a full FTE to manage and support the product.
Once we started putting up daily scorecards of statistics that we were pulling out of Team Dynamics, the team kind of responded. They drove the number of open tickets down. They're paying attention to how many tickets they're closing a day. They're utilizing tasks and tickets to help determine their workload and to help determine what they're going to do. So you're doing something for the community, and it's a great job, and it's a great place to work. You know, it's interesting work, it's exciting work, and you get a real opportunity to have a positive impact on the community.
All right, so I think that was a good overview of how one of our clients is using Team Dynamics. And what I wanted to point out there is really just the concept of the dashboard, the concept of being able to pull that team together. You know, Frank's a talented executive, and he's using that tool to make those confident decisions, as he talked about how he uses that dashboard. So moving on, as you think about your environments, right, and obviously I don't know your environment specifically. When I talk about our experiences, I'm just sharing generally. Please don't take anything I say as me thinking that, hey, I definitely know how your institution works. I don't, but we do have a broad experience across organizations like yours. So as you think about it, this might be a common scenario where, you know, you have tickets coming in that are requesting break fix work, new requests for service. Some of those requests may end up spawning a project. You have groups that are non-IT for HR who have to manage work, facilities managing work, people who are managing clinical equipment and the equipment in the ER. All of those individuals are managing work, service, projects. And so what we tend to see is this desire to consolidate and get our arms around what's happening. right? So that we can then make good decisions about how we deploy resources to reduce drains on time. What's amazing is when our clients can identify an area where they're spending an inordinate amount of time that was invisible to them before. And then they can launch a project to fix that, to free up more time. So it's not only your ability to reduce the strain on resources because they're more efficient, you can now identify ways to continually improve the efficiency and effectiveness of those individuals. Okay? So now let's move on and talk about how organizations that we've worked with are addressing this. How are they addressing this onslaught against your resource capacity? Okay, there's 3 areas we're going to talk about. The first thing that I want to do is talk about some research. So we did a research study with the Help Desk Institute, HDI, and what was really interesting is the first tenet of this pyramid here is self-help. So giving your docs, your administrators, your staff, your patients the ability to self-serve. And healthcare, 29% said that it's a must-have technology. Now, we think that has skyrocketed in the last 2 months because of the demand on IT resources and the impact that has for their time. So what we're seeing is a need to be able to consolidate and free up resources to focus on other things. And some interesting statistics came out of that study too, that the Help Desk Institute has identified that a service request that is not self-service costs on average $22 after you take into account all the time that's spent on the multiple people. $2 is the average cost of self-service. Now, if you don't believe that spread, you say, well, there's no way it costs $22. So what if it costs $10? Right? And what if the average cost of a self-service incident was actually $5? That's still a 50% improvement. So there's a couple components of this that are important. I want to walk through a self-service portal and a checklist of things that we have seen to make winning portals. And we took this from all the organizations, healthcare organizations that we work with, and looked at why have they been successful. So a couple things to point out. When you think about this self-service portal, right, it can be a product like ours, it can be a wiki, it can be a website, but there's a couple core tenets. Number one, has to be easy to navigate. So it has to be easy for anyone who's coming there to, without having to think too much, find what they need. So that could involve getting somebody from a user experience standpoint to look at your website, to map the paths through it. Those are the types of things we do internally. Highly indexed content. What that means is that you can find the content on Google. What we're finding is docs are busy, patients are busy. They just want to Google something with the name of your hospital. Find it. That's really important. Again, that's something, it's easier said than done to do it well. It's something we do with our client portal on the back end. Right up front, place links to the most commonly used things. So the most commonly requested services, the most commonly answered questions right up on that front page, so that whether they're mobile or not, so they can get access. Very clear language. You know, you find many times that when these things start, there's a lot of IT speak, because it's a lot of smart IT people thinking about how you describe Office 365 email, right? People might not have any idea that they're using Office 365. So what we have found is that some of the best organizations will take the initial design of their service request catalog and their knowledge base and run it past users and say, what we're calling this stuff, does it make sense? And it's amazing what you'll find out. It's amazing how little your clients actually know about your infrastructure and the services you provide, how you think about them. They often think about them very differently. So clear language is important. An ability to continually improve content, we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about knowledge management. But it has to be easy for people to keep that up to date. And it has to be mobile. You know, we're finding that people just aren't sitting at their PCs, especially if patients coming in. They're using their phone. All of this should be available and easy to access on the phone without having to download an app. You know, it's interesting. I think there was a push probably 3 years ago, huge push. Like, let's get apps for all of our patients and their families, et cetera. People don't want to use it. They don't want to have another app on their phone that they're going to use. They don't want to see that hospital app on their phone in many cases, right? Accessibility is important. So we're finding more and more that providing accessible technology is not only the right thing to do, because all people should have equal access to technology, but it's also becoming a legal liability if you're not. So we've seen lawsuits launched by class action lawyers who are suing organizations that don't provide accessible technology. So it's easier just to make it accessible. WCAG 2.0 AA is the current standard according to U.S. guidelines, but there is a 2.1. They think that'll phase in over the next 3 to 5 years. And then also providing content permission. So another thing we find as these things become successful is certain groups want to maintain their content and don't want other people to be able to. Now, we have seldomly seen instances of people maliciously or accidentally updating the content of other groups. Most people are too busy for that, okay? But it is important from a perception standpoint for adoption. So it seems like something minor, but it does tend to become more and more important, okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is knowledge management. So talk about the third thing. So as we talk about knowledge management, the practice of collecting and curating knowledge is actually becoming more and more of a science. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with knowledge-centered service. KCS is the acronym most commonly used. It's a framework we love. It's a standard. It's something you can train your teams on. And I'll talk about some of the core tenets, but the idea here is that we're harvesting knowledge as we go about our business of providing service. And over time, we accumulate enough knowledge that it actually makes a big difference as to how people can self-serve. From that HDI study, you can see healthcare, this was important. 66% said that this was important. Now, if you'll notice, overall industry is 49. So healthcare is thinking about this quite a bit. And let's talk about some of the core tenets of knowledge-centered service. Okay, so there's 4 main areas we'll talk about. First, knowledge is created as the product of problem solving. What that means is that anytime a request hits your service team, it should have a piece of knowledge attached to it, either an existing piece of knowledge, so you can push that back out to the client so they can hopefully answer their own question, or the next time they have that question, they may remember that they have an answer available to them, or you're creating new knowledge content. So if a service desk technician does not find a knowledge article for the question they're being asked or the incident that's being reported, they create one. And then that goes through a review process. Doesn't have to be complicated, right? But there is a review process that you go through where that is vetted by subject matter experts, then published. Second is that we're evolving this. So we are reviewing this stuff on a regular basis. Every so many months, the subject matter experts are going to go ahead and review that content to make sure it's still up to date. Third, it's accessible in a knowledge base. So we talked a little bit about some of the core tenets of self-service. This is where you see a lot of overlap between these two topics. That customer portal is the best place to have that knowledge base, to have all that content available on Google. Aside from things that are sensitive, obviously you need to be able to protect that content. So being able to say, hey, this portion is indexed and searchable in Google and this is not, that's important. And the fourth is that learning and sharing and collaboration are rewarded. So there is a process by which knowledge contributors can be identified and promoted for the amount of content that they're producing, the quality of that content. There's the concept of a knowledge coach who reviews content. And so it can be something fabulous for your organization if you aren't already doing that. So one of the things I like about this, I mentioned a little earlier, but I want to reiterate it, is that KCS is very simple to understand. The concept makes a lot of sense. It provides a framework that is evolving based upon industry feedback. So it's something that you can continue on with in your organization for the foreseeable future, and it's something that you can train your teams on relatively inexpensively. So in a time where we're seeing budgets being placed under scrutiny, this is one thing that we can do to provide some career development. And I know a lot of you are probably looking for those opportunities. Online certification for KCS is not very expensive. And it also gives your people career paths. So you can set up for some of the team members on the service desk, for example, where you're just scratching your head and say, hey, how do I provide a career path for some of these folks? Well, this is one way to do it. ITIL is another one standard that you can provide as a framework to help people develop in their careers, but I like KCS a lot. So this is something to look into. So knowledge-centered service. If you're not doing it already or unfamiliar with it, it's definitely worth some research, right, while we're working from home or whatever your situation is. And I think it could be beneficial to your organization. The next thing we want to talk about here is KCS adoption. 52% in healthcare. That's high. Look at the overall industry across all industries, 31. So a lot of people are thinking about this and doing this already, but there's 48% of the organizations that are not. Or if you think in your head, we're doing a little bit of KCS, are there ways that KCS could be expanded to help us? Remember, the goal here is that over time, we spend less and less time fulfilling requests that people can fulfill on their own. That's the basics of it. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about it. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is the role of the project management office. If you're familiar with the term PMO, great. But if not, the project management office is an organization that typically oversees a framework for reviewing potential projects, prioritizing projects. Many times they own the resource capacity planning component, and at times they can suggest or mandate standards for how projects are managed, the tools. Sometimes they provide project managers to manage projects. Other times maybe it's just training. So there's lots of different structures that a PMO can fit within. But in this context, for this conversation, a strong PMO can help guide transformations. So when all of your priorities change or your budgets shift, coming up with a thoughtful plan for, hey, which projects will we need to delay to divert resources to things that are now more pressing, right? What areas of the organization could we divert to these initiatives as well without damaging the operational work or the projects we want to keep in flight? And that's a key point. So we don't see how making shifts in resources are going to impact everything else in the organization. We might inadvertently hurt initiatives that we thought were going to continue to progress along their timeline to hit their objectives, whether it's an implementation or maybe the implementation of a new service or technology, what have you. So PMOs often guide organizations through this process, and we find it highly valuable. So if you think at the simplest, a PMO does a great job of managing and measuring your project intake. So all these potential projects come in, which ones are we going to do? Which ones should supplant projects that we're currently working on? How do we justify that to our administration? How can we tell the story to convince people that it's necessary? Okay, I think that's a really important thing to think about. Okay, now it says here 61% of healthcare organizations do not have a formal PMO. I would like to ask that question to the group. So take a minute, simple yes or no, do you have a formal PMO? And we'll see what the results look like here. I'll just give it a couple more seconds. And as we're letting people answer, you know, when I talked about PMOs taking many different forms, I think what's important is to think about the business pain that you're suffering, and then determine, if you don't have a PMO, what that PMO might do. So, for example, if projects are being managed fairly effectively, the PMO maybe doesn't need to provide project managers to oversee projects. Maybe what they need to do is be managing just that intake and making sure that we have the resources available to do the projects that we commit to. So you can tweak the definition or the roles and responsibilities of that PMO based upon those business pains. And that's also something Team Dynamics can help through with process consulting as well, prior to, you know, it's not tool related at all, but process related. Okay, so about an even split, yes and no. Okay, so this group is doing a little bit better than the overall group from the survey, so that's encouraging. And also with a group with a with an industry like healthcare, one of the most amazing things about it is how collaborative everyone is. So if you know organizations with PMOs, or you have a regional group of IT professionals in healthcare, right? I know that that's a strong group in Michigan, for example. Ask. I mean, so much good insight and so much good intelligence is out there. I mean, our healthcare groups are just doing so much good work. So there's a lot of that. So interesting. You guys are ahead of the curve, so to speak, this subset. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to mention with this intake component, as we talk about takeaways, okay, is the increase in spending that we've seen, a dramatic increase in telemedicine, automation, and self-service. So, you know, if we had done this 2 months ago, we would have said, hey, healthcare IT spending is on the rise, right? We don't have any up-to-date data on this, but we are seeing the stress that the COVID-19 crisis has placed on our customers here. And so we've seen a major shift of resources, again, to self-service, telemedicine, automation, things that are reducing the need for resources and allowing resources to focus on transformation that's happening right now. So I'm sure we will get more concrete data about what this has done to IT spending. We don't have that now, but all we can say based upon the feedback from the clients is those 3 areas are receiving a lot of attention right now. So we're seeing a lot of attention around that self-service side and some of the automation side. And obviously telemedicine has taken off. It's sort of the telemedicine technology's time to shine, certainly along with that self-service. So want to walk through some key takeaways and then get to some questions. So first things we talk about here is better managing of the team's work. So having that single platform view so that we can, A, make sure people know what's going on, leadership can make confident decisions, push back on unreasonable expectations, can make decisions about how resources are allocated as far as how we might reorganize our teams, right, where we might need additional investment. Even if your budgets are under strain, you might have a case for justifying additional investment. Without data, it's hard to do that, okay? And providing a single view for your team members so that that DBA you have that's working their tail off, the developers, they have one consolidated place. They can see everything that they need right in front of them. They can update it all from one place. Secondly, self-service and knowledge management. So think about a self-service portal experience that's accessible, it's mobile, it's easy to navigate. The things that they are likely to ask are front and center, and they can find the content on Google just by searching. And then that knowledge-centered service to help us continually build our knowledge content so that we can do more and more self-service. You know, give an example of one client. Their goal was to have 70 knowledge-based articles in the first 6 months that were regularly used. And they launched KCS, and in that first 6 months, they ended up with 1,700. And the inbound calls and emails dropped by over half. So just think about it in your head. What would it mean to my organization if my inbound emails and phone calls dropped by half? What could we do, right? Could you reorganize your department? Could you address those critical incidents that come in more effectively, more thoroughly, provide higher level of satisfaction for the people who really need your help rather than just asking questions that could be answered in a knowledge-based article? You know, those are the types of things to think about when you're thinking about how could this be valuable. The last is thinking about that formal PMO, right? We talked about how we can manage project intake and how we can get a better idea of where our resources are impacted by transformation. So we have our portfolio of projects, programs of projects. When a change needs to be made, how do we shuffle that deck without damaging things we didn't intend? A PMO can play a critical role there. If you're having problems with actual project management and delivery, PMO can play a critical role there, helping those projects hit their milestones and their budgets. Okay? So that's the summary. Now I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin
Sure.
today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. If we don't get to your question today on the webinar, the Team Dynamics team will follow up with you afterwards. So I will get started with the first question that came in. This audience member wants to know, is your software similar to Jira?
So, good question. So Jira is a tool for managing issues around typically software development. So that's one way to manage that type of work, and it has a wall or board type format. We have a component of our project and portfolio management tool. It's called a card wall that allows you to do that. So it's similar in that sense. But what it also does is allow you to manage waterfall-based projects as well. So you're not limited to that one structure. And you can pull in ticket work, so that operational work that's coming from tickets, into your card wall. So now you have this hybrid environment where I don't just have to manage my Jira issues here and then all my other work's managed elsewhere. I can mix them into one interface. So I think that's where we're different from that. So think of Team Dynamics as this enterprise tool where there's a component that functions like Jira for the teams who really like that type of work management, but then there's other tools around it. And all of our ticketing work is included as well.
Good deal. Thank you for clarifying that. The next question I have for you is, how does a PMO work with an IT governance committee?
Okay, that's a great question. Now, there's lots of different ways those can be structured, so I'll just take a stab at what we think is most common. So typically, the PMO is working with an IT governance committee to present to them status of the current portfolio, present to them the demands that have yet to be filled. So think about those potential projects, talk through the value of each. So frame up for that governance committee, hey, here are the 50 things that have been requested. Here are the 50 things that are in flight. Based upon some model, we think that the 10 projects at the top of the list are the most valuable, and here's why. If we were to try to implement those, here's what we might need to change about our current portfolio. Maybe we don't need to change anything, but they can help these governance committees work through the decisions of which projects to continue, which to stop, and which to add or which to modify. So it's typically that role. That governance committee is educated by the PMO, and the PMO is essentially an advisor. They will help the governance committee understand the impacts of the choices they're making. So it's usually a very symbiotic relationship.
Got it. Thank you for that response. My next question for you is, how do you get people to start using a self-service portal instead of just emailing IT?
A great question. So I've seen a bunch of different methods. I've seen the shut off email method. So just shut off the email address. I don't see that as often, but people have done it successfully. Most often what we see is an educational process. So essentially, we've seen clients who do clever video clips with their teams about this new portal. They send it out to the staff, faculty, administrators, and to educate them. They do that a couple times, do webinars. And then what happens is, if anytime an email request comes in, the response is, hey, did you see this service? Looking forward, here's where you can make this request. Here's a knowledge base, a link to a knowledge base article. So the response to an email is, hey, go out and look at this portal. Here's where you can find your answer. You don't have to wait on a response from us. So over time, that improves. You can also say, hey, if you use the portal, we're going to respond within whatever your SLA is, 24 hours. Email, it might be 36. I've seen everything on that spectrum, but it's a constant reinforcement. And then eventually you can shut that email address off if you're successful with communicating and enough of the responses come in, or enough of the requests come in through the portal. Also, you can do an automated response to those emails. Say, hey, thank you for sending in this email. Click here to go to our service portal to fill out a request. for this.
Thanks for clarifying. My next question is, to improve accessibility to tickets and projects through Team Dynamics, do you have plugins that integrate with Office 365?
We do in certain places. Obviously, all of it doesn't, but I'll share with you a couple of examples. So one example is with SharePoint and OneDrive. So being able to attach a document or a reference to a document to a task on a project, to an issue, to a project, to a work order or ticket, we can integrate with that. We also have a Microsoft Teams integration that's rolling out shortly, especially with work from home, where you'd be able to search and query all the content in Team Dynamics, comment, work on those things, and then post that information back. So that's pretty exciting too. Slack as well, but this was a specific Microsoft question. So.
Thank you. My next question is, what system or how do you track hours, for IT resources that your specific IT resources spend on various projects? So how do you track hours for your IT teams?
So tracking time is in our experience, has been a very culturally sensitive issue. So the first part about tracking hours that we've found is a success factor is making sure that people understand why very clearly. And part of understanding why is also understanding why not. So we have seen a lot of time tracking failures when organizations just ask to track time, don't talk about it very much, don't explain why, because there's a lot of fear. There's fear that, am I going to be judged about how much time I put in on this? Is the amount of time I spend on certain activities going to be compared with my colleagues for raises and part of my performance reviews? Most of the time, the answer to that is no, but people don't understand that. So typically, the starting of a time tracking initiative is coming from the top, from the CIO, saying, listen, here's why. Common reasons would be, we need to understand clearly where our time is going so we can justify additional hiring, so we can make sure we have the right resources where they're needed, right? And so that you don't have to be firefighting. We don't want you working 80 hours a week. That's not sustainable. We need your help. And then clearly describing why not. This data is not going to be used in your annual review. This data will not be used to compare you with other people in the organization. This data is not going to be used to micromanage you. People have a lot of fear. So after you get past that, let's say we've gotten past the fear, people start doing it, the question becomes, at what level do we need to track time? So thinking about your business problems. So if your business problem is, I need to understand how much time is being spent on projects versus operations versus support, right? Maybe what you start doing is you're not requiring people to track time specifically at the ticket level, at the task level. You're just saying generally every week, just tell me how much time you're spending roughly on service, on operations, on projects, right, to get your answer. Now, if your business problem is that you need granularity around what types of service work is taking the most time, then you may need to look at that ticket level tracking. So as you're looking at systems or you're going to custom develop a system, whether you're looking at Team Dynamics or you're custom dev something, then you look at, okay, when someone opens a record, how easy is it to say, hey, I spent 10 hours on this thing, save, right? So evaluate it from that perspective. How easy is it going to be? And also I would suggest too, looking for multiple methods. So what I mean by that is if you're looking at designing a system or buying a system and the only way to track time is at the ticket level, some people don't want to have to do that because at the end of the week they might say, oh gosh, I got to go back to all these tickets and update them. So having a way to see everything in one view where I can just say, hey, here's essentially my timesheet. Yeah, here's all the tickets. Here I spent X on this, Y on this, Z on this, right? But some people do like to do it at the ticket level. So I think a solution, whether that's commercial or custom dev, that allows for both ways to enter time is important. That'll really help you from an adoption standpoint.
Thank you so much for that informative answer. The next question I have for you is, how do you manage the difficult task of maintaining a successful knowledge base on limited resources where maybe you can't keep reviewing all of the content?
Sure. Well, in the ideal world, you've implemented KCS and you have knowledge owners who go through and do that on a regular basis. I completely understand that that might be panacea for some of our organizations, but priorities can help. So saying, all right, it's likely that 20% of your knowledge base articles answer 80% of the questions, right? So maybe you're doing a regular review on that top 20% and not as frequently on the other 80%. So that's something to think about. Or maybe you just do an update when a system changes. So it's triggered by a new version of whatever software you rolled out. So it's essentially pinpoint, the knowledge articles that you're reviewing are pinpointed by some sort of change. That's another way to do it. So you're not just in a blanket fashion reviewing every knowledge article for every 6 months, right? Or obviously when a tech finds something that's erroneous, that can be fixed immediately. So that prioritization process might be something to think about.
The next question I have is, what advice would you give to someone who is trying to start a PMO?
Okay. Gain executive buy-in. So starting a PMO without support of the CIO or your key stakeholders is really difficult. So as a CIO, or if you are the CIO trying to start this, the CFO is usually a good place to start, right? Because the pain of starting too many projects that you can't finish, or because you have too many projects that they start going over budget, that's painful for a CFO in many cases. And a lot of times CFOs like structure, like process. So gaining executive buy-in is absolutely critical. Then I would say, as I mentioned earlier, think about the business problems. Why do you want a PMO? Is it because there are too many project requests and they all get approved and they're all thrown in a pile that you just have to hack through and you never seem to get to them, right? And your customers are complaining that the projects never get done. That is one pain. And if that's the pain, putting an intake process into place with some sort of governance committee might be the answer. If it's an execution issue, maybe it's actually focusing on project management processes or providing project management oversight for some of those initiatives. So by focusing on the business pain that you're having, you're looking to solve, then it's easier to articulate to those executives, hey, here's the pain we're having. These are the steps we'd like to take to fix that pain. And those pains should be shared. I mean, if IT gets projects done late, no one likes that because then your stakeholders aren't getting the results they're looking for. And that's something you can be open about, but explain why. Hey, we've got twice as many projects as we can reasonably do, so yeah, things are slipping. Sometimes a hard conversation to have, but important. So if you can align the actions you want to take with business problems that matter to those senior leaders, to those executives, that's giving you the best shot at succeeding from what we've seen. Now, obviously, it's worked lots of ways. I have seen it where it's just a CIO implements a PMO without talking to anybody, and it works swimmingly well. But I think that's more the exception.
Those are some great tips. Thanks so much, Andrew. Could you share a little bit about how your tool compares with Servicenow?
Sure. So Servicenow is a service management platform really focused on the Global 1000. And so what we're finding is Team Dynamics, the goal is that we provide robust enterprise-grade service management tools. Our tools are built for the industries we serve. We're not built for manufacturing or financial services, right? We're built for these industries. And in addition to that, our goal, the ethos is very different. So Servicenow MO is let's make the product very, very difficult and heavy to configure because their whole ecosystem is predicated on consultants who go and implement it. Our ethos is all about let's give enterprise capabilities, but let's make it easy to own. We don't assume that our clients want to have consultants on staff for a year to get something up and running. We don't assume that our clients, as Frank mentioned, want to have one-to-many full-time people just configuring our product. Our goal is that you can have one admin work on this one day a week, and that's enough. right? And you will have a fully functioning, robust system. Plus, we focus on things like accessibility, that indexing of content that our clients need. Our project portfolio management system is world-class. We've consistently won best in class from Infotech several years in a row. So we're very much focused on making sure that you've got a robust platform, but that it's easy to own and you're not beholden to these consulting partners year after year, or our consulting services. Our attitude is, hey, we want to get you up and running as effectively as possible. And if you need us, we're there. If you don't want to do some training, we can provide it. If you don't want to add configurations for a new group coming on board, we can help, but you don't need us. You don't need. I mean, we're very low code, so you're not going to have people who need to know how to write JavaScript and write code to make things happen. It's all point, click, and key. So I think those are some of the differentiating factors, and we're seeing a kind of tidal wave of organizations moving to Team Dynamics who are used to the other side of that equation.
Thank you for sharing some of those distinctions. That is super helpful. Now, my next question that I have for you is, do you have any tools or process suggestions for determining the most efficient way to balance between projects and service tickets? And then, is there a process or team structure you've seen work that really allows for less task switching with each individual resource or across teams?
Okay, can you read the first part of that again? I want to make sure I have it right, like the first sentence.
Yes. Do you have any tools or process suggestions for determining the most efficient way to balance between projects and service tickets?
I don't know that I fully understand the question, so let me apologize to whoever asked that, but I will do my very best to answer. So if I have resources that work on both projects and operational work, let's say changes in some service, the most important thing is to understand how should we be allocated. So if I work for you, what percentage of my time should be available and dedicated towards project work versus these other areas? And then we can start assessing, are we really spending time within those thresholds, right? So at least we know when we're not, and then we can make adjustments. And it's very common, I think something very common before resource management processes for a manager to go speak with one of their team members and say, hey, why are you behind on this initiative? Well, I got pulled into this other initiative 2 weeks ago that I've been helping out on. And the manager says, well, I didn't know you were working on that. Well, they said that you did know. That happens all the time. So having some visibility into actually what I'm doing as your direct report is pretty important, because there might be some things that surprise you. The second part from a structure standpoint, how you prevent task switching, that's a really difficult thing to even start with an answer without getting more understanding, but I will take a shot. So my assumption would be that somebody's context switching and something that was important to you didn't get done because they switched to do something else. Sometimes that's as simple as setting clear guidelines as to priority, whether it's, hey, use your best judgment to start, and if that doesn't work, we'll take another step. But some of those steps can be using things like impact and urgency on items to determine how they're worked on, or a service level agreement. How close to our service level agreements are we getting? So what some of our clients do is they'll set up a dashboard for each resource that shows, here are the priorities, right? Here's your queue of work. Here's the top priority based upon impact and probability, right? And SLA could be another component in that equation, but here are the things you should be working on to help guide them a little bit. So I think that can be helpful. And obviously I mentioned a dashboard in our tool. It can be any tool that you're using to do such a thing. So I don't know if that hit the mark, but that's my best shot given the information I had. So I apologize.
Thank you for attempting to answer that challenging question. So I have one more question for you today, and I know you touched on it a bit with managing the knowledge base, but can you share a little bit more about the best way to manage knowledge and, just making sure that there's no old information being shared?
Sure. I mean, it comes down to that review process, and part of that review process is formal, meaning every X number of months we're going to review this for accuracy, or anytime we change a technology, we're going to review related knowledge article. That's the trigger. And the other part of it's informal, where a technician can flag something and say, hey, this thing's out of date. Now, whether you empower that technician to make a change right there, or you have a process where someone's notified that that's out of date and then they update it, that's a process question for you internally.
So, thank you, Andrew. So before we wrap up today, I wanted to ask you if you have any final thoughts you would like to share with the audience.
I think to me, in times like we're experiencing, the suggestion I would have is just standing back at your whiteboard or in PowerPoint or whatever medium, notepad, and writing down what are our biggest business problems. Okay, what are my problems with my resources today? What do I not know? And working backwards into the solution. I mean, I think obviously if you're here, you have limited resources or some pressure on your resources, thinking about, okay, what are those? Is self-service something that will help me? Knowledge management, that KCS component. What about a project management office, or you don't need to call it a PMO, but some of those processes, and just work backwards from those business problems. And I think that things will become clearer as to the right direction. And obviously, you can rely on advisors that you have. Sometimes it's good to get a second look once you have your business problems defined, to get someone else to take a look, whether that's a peer, someone else on this webinar that or process consultants like we have on our team to take a look. Sometimes that helps too, as a little bit of a sanity check, and also to give you just different perspectives.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those final thoughts, Andrew. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank Andrew for his excellent presentation and Team Dynamics for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.